Thank you so much for being here. My name's Lisa Glenn. I am the Education Coordinator at New Global Citizens. You might have noticed I am not Jennifer Volman, who is in your program. We had a little personnel switch. So I am here today to talk with you a little bit about New Global Citizens and how we work to build global IQ and how educators can build global IQ in the classroom. I will warn you, this is going to be a collaborative learning experience, and that is because this is the last session, so I don't want you to fall asleep. So you will be asked to talk to people, you will be asked to walk around and move. My apologies if that is going to be stressful for you in the last session, but you are going to have to get out of your seat. So if you need to do anything right now in order to have things other than like notes out of your lap, you can take this time to do that. So I'm here probably for the same reason that you are. You saw this session title, Building Global IQ, and you thought, as I have many times in the education sphere, this is the first time in about 20 years, ever, that in 20 years we have no idea where we're going to be. We have no idea what jobs students will be doing. There are jobs that exist now that won't exist in 20 years, and there are jobs we haven't even dreamed of yet that we have to prepare our students for. Because the world is shrinking, and we all know that that's the case due to the extreme connectivity that we have via the internet, via media, and especially social media that students are so good at. The world is getting smaller and smaller, and our students have to be prepared to deal with that world. Now, this is both a blessing and a curse, right? We are so glad that the world is shrinking because our students can talk to people all over the world. They can collaborate with world leaders in a way that has never been possible. And at the same time, we have to process all that information. And as educators, we're the people who are on the front lines there and who have to do the processing with students. So we have to be able to teach our students, and we have to be able ourselves to adapt to all of the change that's happening so quickly. We have to prepare our students to communicate with people of incredibly diverse backgrounds, of incredibly differing perspectives, people who are in different countries, of different religions, of different ethnicities, and that's a lot to take in. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how you can begin to do that in your classroom. I hope that it spurs some ideas for you. I hope it spurs some ideas for me. And as long as you're okay with the collaborative piece, we're going to commence. All right, it's too late to leave. So, New Global Citizens, we are a nonprofit organization that provides educational resources to teachers to connect students to global issues. We also partner with nonprofit institutions that we've vetted so that teachers can be certain that those organizations are trustworthy that they're working with. We work to provide students with a global perspective, an opportunity to create change, and the skills they need to thrive in a global knowledge economy. And we do that through a framework of 10 global issues. Now, these are the huge challenges that students are facing in the real world. These are the huge challenges that we as adults are facing in the real world. This list is basically the Millennium Development Goals plus armed conflict and natural disasters, which our students requested we add because they felt like these were really important issues on a global scale. And they're areas of challenge. Nobody's going to argue that. But they're also areas of great opportunity because they are the challenges that tie us together as humanity. We all have to deal with these things. And so they can tie us together as educators with a common goal to get our students to the point that they can tackle these challenges. You probably know there are 7 billion people in the world today. It's a lot of people. But it's not about knowing that there are 7 billion people. That's a great statistic. It's not about that. It's about knowing how to work with those 7 billion people because we're now going to be asking our students to go out into the world, even if they never leave their hometown, to go out into the world and talk to people and interact with people of different backgrounds, of different cultures, of different religions. This is not something that students show up in your classroom knowing how to do. In fact, it's not something that your students show up in their classroom being able to do with people who are almost exactly like them. I was reading an article this morning. This is a true story. You can look it up. That in New York City, the new fancy thing to do for your toddler is to pay someone to be their play guide. Play guide. This is a real thing. Pay this person $400 an hour, was the rate in the article, in order to sit with your toddler and facilitate their play so that they're nice to each other. Okay? So this is a concept that's real, right? If you leave toddlers in a room together and walk out the door, they're not always real nice to each other. And that's toddlers who might have grown up together and who might live next door to each other and who might be exactly the same. If we're not providing those skills to our students, who are growing older and certainly have learned not to throw Play-Doh at each other, but might not have learned how to communicate effectively, we're not serving our students well. Those soft skills in the classroom are really a lot less soft than we give them credit for. It's quite difficult to teach students how to interact. And we're asking students to do that because we're going to ask them to go out and to be adults in a world where they have to get along with these 7 billion people. They need to master skills in communication, in collaboration, across borders, not just within their cubicle or within their office space, but across borders. Critical thinking so that they can process all the information they're taking in, and building cross-cultural understanding. All right, I warned you. So this is going to be the first part of the interactive portion of our program today. I'm going to ease you in. This is a quiz. There are prizes involved, though. I was a 6th grade teacher, so I know the power of a tchotchke, especially if I throw it on the floor. So you are going to get a prize for your participation in this quiz, and then I'll let you have a little break time, and you can passively learn, and then we're going to get together and work some more. All right, the first question in our quiz. Bengali is the official language of a densely populated Asian country in which over 70% of the population lives in rural areas. Name that country. Not India. Bangladesh. Excellent. Bangladesh is the 7th largest country in the world by population. Who knew that? 7th largest. Raise your hand, it's fine. Gloat, you're impressed. You knew that. Just a few of us. Okay, Bangladesh is really important to the U.S. because of its geopolitical power, right? It is positioned in a very important place. It's near India. It happens to be within a very short distance to Russia. That's short compared to from here to Russia, unless, of course, you live in Alaska, but that's another story. So Bangladesh is becoming very important to the U.S. The ambassador to Bangladesh, Dan Mozina, says that Bangladesh is particularly important in the coming years because 80% of its population is under the age of 40. So they're about to have a workforce boom that is incredible. If you are not preparing your students to work with Bangladeshi students, you are doing them a disservice because they will be. It's a very growing country, and in fact, Dan Mozina, the ambassador, says that it is a country that against all odds is going places, and going places fast. All right, second question in our quiz. There are more than 150 ethnic groups living within a large country that borders both the Pacific and Arctic Oceans, but not the Atlantic. It is Russia. Can you guys pass that pin back? All right, that one was tricky because of the oceans, and I actually had no idea that there are 150 ethnic groups in Russia. I had no clue. This is important for us because U.S. diplomatic relations with Russia are shifting. You might have noticed that in the news. Things are changing a little bit. They've changed since the Cold War, but they've also changed since the last 10 to 20 years. The U.S. Task Force on Russia and U.S. National Interests lists the following things, and I'm going to read them. Preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, maintaining a balance of power in Europe and Asia, preventing a large-scale or sustained terrorist attack on the American homeland, ensuring energy security, and assuring the stability of the international economy. Okay, those are some pretty weighty issues that we're looking at with Russia. But it's not about knowing the facts, right? It's great that I can spout off facts. I read them off of a computer. That's not the point. The point is developing the attitude to engage with the facts. That students actually see these facts as important, and they want to engage with them and see the interconnectedness. How are Bangladesh and Russia connected? We'll come back to that. Unfortunately, most students go through their K-12 experience with no exposure to global issues. Now, we're really lucky in this room that we work in the context of IB. So this is not true for most of your students, and thank goodness. But you have no idea how many education groups I talk to where the teacher says, I have never brought up global issues in my classroom. Why? Because I don't know how, because I'm afraid to do it, because they're controversial, because my students are confused by it, or because my students know more than me. And that's okay. These global issues are not just about geography, they're about the things that connect us as humans, and the things that connect us as future citizens. Without having exposure to these global issues, students can't fully understand our connectedness and are not going to be effective citizens, they're not going to be effective students, and they're not going to be effective workers in the future. In fact, 43% of 18 to 24-year-olds are unable to identify Mexico as the largest source of American immigrants today. That was a surprising statistic for me because I live in Arizona. So I feel like my students could probably do that, but many cannot. 37% of 18 to 24-year-olds cannot locate China on a map. China is in the news a lot, guys. It's not like Bangladesh, for example, where we don't hear about it that much in the news. China. 56% of 18 to 24-year-olds are unaware that the EU is the organization sponsoring the euro. Let me break that down for you. The European Union is the organization sponsoring the euro, the currency of the European Union. Okay? Terrifying, frankly. So, in light of these really serious deficits of knowledge that students have, and this is just factual knowledge, we have to understand the importance of cross-cultural communication in our students' world, and we have to act to ensure that our students are going to be successful. That not only can they tell you these facts, but they can tell you why they're important. The Global Director of Staffing for Honeywell says that all major hiring companies need global citizens with global sensitivities, global perspective, global insight, along with maturity and a capacity for risk-taking. He says that's what every major organization is looking for in every industry. So these skills aren't just because we want students to know from an intrinsic value, right? Now, I want students to know things on an intrinsic level, right? It makes me feel good that my students have extra knowledge about international issues, but also they're going to need to know this just to be successful. So today we're talking about global IQ, and in order to do that, we need to talk about IQ. IQ, or intelligence quotient, has been a little bit controversial in our field, right? But traditionally, it's been used as a predictor of educational achievement, of job performance, and even of income. Now, global IQ is going to be the same thing. It's going to be a measure of educational achievement, job performance, and income. Because your students who are able to interact with people of differing perspectives and from differing cultures are going to be able to be successful in the workforce, in college, and in citizenship. Now, the good thing about this is that global IQ is not a static trait. It's not fixed. It's something that we can develop in students through travel, through study, through inquiry. In fact, my own global IQ has changed a lot as an adult. So I grew up in the South of the United States. I was a student at a liberal arts college. That sort of helped my global IQ because I was engaging with ideas. Then I traveled to South Africa, and I lived in South Africa for a year. And that really had a huge effect on my global IQ because I was being forced to work with people of totally different backgrounds constantly. And then I became an educator, and that changed my global IQ as well. And so this is not something that we have to despair about. Well, my kids aren't interested. My students aren't interested in these issues. They will be. They don't know anything about it now. Well, that's okay. We'll get them there. Well, they can't work together in groups. They just can't. They can, and you can get them there. And you know that, right? But those are the typical things that we're afraid of when we're building global IQ. So when we talk about global IQ, these are the traits, the habits of mind, similar to the Common Core habits of mind, that we want students to develop. We want them to investigate the world. We want them to recognize perspectives that are their own and others. And I say their own because many students don't realize that they have a perspective that maybe isn't everyone's. I'm sure you've never met that student. Also, that they can communicate their ideas effectively and with diverse audiences. That they can collaborate with peers and others from diverse background. As Sir Ken Robinson says, collaboration is the stuff of learning. That's the piece that we really want to get to. And finally, that they can take action. That they can take all of these skills that they've developed and put them into action immediately. And the action piece is particularly important in Global IQ because it's the empowerment that students get. Students see that I can make a difference now. Not in 10 years, not in the future that we tell our students about. I shared with some of you in this room, actually, when I was exhibiting. I taught in Phoenix in a low-income area, very, very low-income area, very difficult area socially. And my students had an expected life expectancy. That was redundant, and I said it twice. They had a life expectancy of about 40 years in their neighborhood. Okay, so I would say, well, you'll need this in the future. And they would say, okay, like I'm ever going to get there. Students don't perceive future in the same way that we do as adults. They don't understand it in the same manner. In fact, you can show that students actually can't always comprehend 3 hours from now, right? Because they don't have that frontal lobe development. So we want students taking action in the classroom now. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how you can do this in the context of your class. The good news is that with Common Core, you've been given permission to do this in a great way. And I know when I say Common Core in a room of educators, there's this like collective shudder, right? And some of you are shuddering for good reasons and some of you are shuddering for not so good reasons, and that's okay. But the beautiful thing about Common Core is it's giving you permission to teach about these broad overarching themes and to show students connectedness. So we're going to talk a little bit about each habit of mind and what that might look like in a global IQ context. First is investigating the world, all right? In investigating the world, some common standards you're going to hear are students can gather, comprehend, evaluate, synthesize, and report on information and ideas. They can conduct original research in order to answer or solve problems. They can analyze and create media. In science, technology, engineering, and math, they can construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, analyze situations, justify their conclusions, and make plausible arguments. Okay, that's all fine and good. What does that look like within the scope of a global IQ? Okay, how would I take those things and make it developing global IQ? You would do that by doing research through international sources and also on global issues. So you can take any data set you want, right? Why not use one that's an international source that hits on a global issue? And then you're going to make a connection globally. So you're going to make your students make that connection between Bangladesh and Russia. Did anybody think to themselves why Bangladesh and Russia were connected? Why did we choose Bangladesh and Russia? Bangladesh and Russia are allies, and they trade arms regularly. So not only is Bangladesh geopolitically important to the U.S., but it's important to us because if our diplomatic relations might be changing with Russia, we want to make darn sure that we do have allies who are also allies with Russia. Okay, so you have to make those students make those connections. It's not just about Bangladesh being the 7th largest. It's not just about Russia having 150 ethnic groups. It's about understanding how those countries connect to each other, to us, and to other parts of the world. So an example of what we do with this in our curriculum is in our child mortality unit, we give students all of this beautiful graphic information about child mortality. So this is countries and the causes of child mortality. Now, when we say child mortality, we mean children who die before the age of 5 for any reason, okay? If you got really close, you could read some of this data. Students are going to take this data, and in a math class, they would create a graph and show how diseases and populations could change, and you could even show how they change over time. You could give them this data from 2013, from 2008, etc., and have it show how the population changes. In science, you can study disease transmission model that applies to each one of these diseases, and then talk about how prevention models work, okay? And in a humanities context, you might have students study these diseases and then have them write a narrative from the perspective of a mother who has a child with this disease, so she can describe how the child is suffering and what the medical options are, etc. So those are some examples of how you might build that global IQ in the classroom through actual deliverables that hit those standards. Next is recognizing perspectives. Okay, this is also related to the Common Core habits of mind. That is a really common thing that students are asked to do, to recognize perspectives. Standards you might have heard include recognize and express their own perspective, examine perspectives of other people, groups, or schools of thought. In a global IQ, we're talking about the influence of culture. Okay, students need to be able to go beyond just recognizing cultures. Okay, I can tell that you dress differently than me, or that you worship differently than me, but also to see how their culture affects their own perspective. You'd be surprised at how many American students do not know that our culture affects our perspective. And then how other people's culture affect their perspectives, how my culture affects your perspective, and how that changes over time. Okay, so how is it now? How is it 10 years ago? How will it be in 20 years, 50 years, etc.? It's not just about holidays or religion or language. This is going past the traditional international night where we bring in food. This is actually understanding how people think based on their experience. So what does this look like in a classroom context? In our gender equality unit, we actually have students research the reasons that you would empower women. There are two main reasons that organizations and countries empower women. The first is instrumental. That means that we empower women because it helps our economy or because there's some reason to do it, right? The second is intrinsic, which we talked about. It's just because it's good for women and it's good for me. So we have students research those, and then we have them research the three ways that women are usually empowered: through political action, such as the Rwandan parliament requiring half of their members to be women; through NGO action, like an organization like Tostan, who goes around and talks to tribes about avoiding female genital mutilation; or through grassroots action, like in India. Right now, there has been massive grassroots response to the gang rape of young girls in India. Okay, so policy, NGO, and grassroots. They're going to research those three methods of action and then have a debate about which one works best. Okay, which one works best for people of different cultures? How might culture affect your action of change? And finally, how is communication used effectively in your action? So what might be the downfalls of using a policy-based approach, and how would communication be important in that? Next, students are asked to communicate ideas. Standards would include flexible communication and collaboration, useful oral communication and interpersonal skills, use of mixed communication forms, oral, visual, quantitative, and media sources. Okay, they get old, sorry. Math would include constructing viable arguments and communicating them to others. So what does that look like in global IQ? Okay, that's what we really care about. Communicating their ideas effectively with diverse audiences. Okay, I can communicate with you and understand that if I'm going to communicate with you, I really need to think about these three things in your perspective. But when I change and I am actually communicating over here, you have a different range of experiences, and I need to communicate differently as a result. If you're a former sixth grade teacher like me, and you're thinking about the role of audience and how hard that is for students to really grasp, boy, this takes it to a whole other level, right? Not just that your audience is young people, but maybe your audience is young people who speak a different language and who use a different religion, who have a different set of experiences. And, you know, that sounds really hard, and it sounds sort of like, why would I want to do that, right? Why would I want to make my job harder? Because we have to. Because in 20 years, we don't know where we're going to be, but we do know we're going to be more connected. Additionally, we have to show students how effective communication affects understanding and collaboration. And ineffective communication does the opposite, right? It hurts collaboration. You're probably thinking, I've had a boss who could think about that. I've had a boss I really wish understood how their communication affects our collaboration. And I do too. But we want to build students who are able to address those issues head on. So how does that look? We have an epidemics unit where students can choose an epidemic to study. They have to choose the epidemic, they're tasked with learning everything they possibly can about that epidemic, and then they have to create a presentation, a public health campaign, in the style of a real public health worker. So, this could look very different depending on your audience and their experiences. You might make an infographic on tuberculosis to post for people to read. You could make a cartoon video about how malaria is spread and how to use bed nets appropriately. Or you might give an oral presentation about how AIDS and HIV is transmitted. Okay? Now, when you're looking at your audience, you have to not only think about, are these children, are these adults, where are they from, but also cultural norms, illiteracy, religious norms, stigma that's associated with the diseases, and political restrictions in many places. So this really gets students looking at perspective in a very, very different and graded way. All right, we want our students to collaborate, and as Sir Ken Robinson said, that's really the stuff of learning. The speaking and listening elements of Common Core are what really, really gets you able to work on the collaboration and say, well, you know, this is really hitting important standards. So with Global IQ, we're talking about understanding people from various cultures. And the way that we really work on this in the classroom is a lot of our resources are project-based, right? And the beauty of project-based learning is you're all working in a group. And the danger of project-based learning is you're all working in a group. And so we really work to give teachers behavior management plans and also team management plans and team contracts so that you can explicitly sit down with your students and say, what did you do today to build your collaboration skills? And they can become reflective on how they're building their collaboration skills and why that's going to be important for them going forward. And finally, we want students to take action. So this is the focus on career and college, but for me, it's really the focus on now. Okay? In a Global IQ, action is the empowerment piece. Action is the piece that tells me that I can be a change agent in my world now, as a student. It is a transformational thing for a student to realize that what they're learning actually makes a difference. I remember I was not a great math student. Okay? I was good enough, I made it by, and I had a great math teacher that I just loved to pieces, Mr. Armand. He was the toughest math teacher. He's probably the toughest teacher I ever had. And I got to the point in trig where I was just so frustrated, and I came up and I said, Mr. Armand, when am I going to use this? And he pointed to the poster that you probably are familiar with that was over on his wall that had the standard and when you would use it. So it would be like, you know, you're going to use equations if you become an environmental scientist. And you're going to, and so I went to the trigonometry concept we were studying, and I went, engineer? I am never going to be an engineer. That sounds awful. And I turned off. Done. My brain turned off. I did not care at all. And I was a kid who loved school, loved learning, right? So we really want students who maybe don't love school all the time and don't love learning, but we also want students who do love learning to all feel empowered that what they're learning right now matters right now for the world at large. All right, so how do we do that? We make students active learners in global issues. How? By creating projects where what they do matters and will affect a global issue. So instead of making a diorama or something that you can throw away the next day, a poster, we actually want students to be creating something that a real-world problem solver would create that adds to the canon of information on that issue. You can publish on YouTube. You can send the information out via social media so that you're making a difference now. It's a real impact, and it makes the world a lot more tangible for students in a classroom. We also do this by empowering teachers through curriculum support and professional development. You know as well as I do that the #1 predictor of student success is a fantastic teacher. Okay, so we want to provide you with that professional development. And that's part of what we're going to do today. All right, so I told you, I warned you, that you are going to have to get up and move around and talk to people, and you are, okay? You are going to do an activity that we do with students to introduce the 10 NGC global issues, and you are going to have to get up and move around and apply your learning. So, you're going to do what we call the issue tree. Going to be in groups of about 6 to 10, and I did that when I first came in this room, and it looks like we're more around the 60 mark, so let's do groups of 6, okay? Groups of 6 would give us about 10 groups. You are going to use the issue information provided. That means that I am going to hand you one of these global issue sheets, okay? And you are going to use one of the pieces of chart paper around the room. I know what you're thinking, teachers. The markers will bleed through on the wall. I already tested it, and they don't. That's why you buy bleed-proof paper. You're going to get markers, you're going to go to the paper, and you're going to graphically represent the issue you've been given. I'll give you some examples in a moment. Your goal is that somebody who's looking at your poster could gain a basic understanding of your issue just by looking at it, not by talking at all, just looking. We want students to be able to communicate effectively, and one of the very specific ways that Common Core asks us to do that is through graphic representation, through data, through pictures. Okay, so this is an example of an activity that would deal with that. All right, I'm going to give you some pretty examples that teachers and students have made. We call this an issue tree because you can go about this by making a tree. You see on the trunk of the tree is the issue. On the branches of the tree are the causes and the effects. And there are some solutions here and there. Or you could be a little more creative. This is a teacher group that represented natural disasters with a volcano. But they're still showing the causes, the effects, some solutions. They have some relief organizations, etc. Or if you want to be really creative, call in a student because they're awesome. This is a student example. It shows maternal health, the effects of maternal health, some problems, definitions, facts, etc. So it doesn't matter how you graphically represent, and if you're thinking I'm not artistic, that's okay too, and you can make a T-chart if you want to, okay? Any way to graphically represent. You just have to make sure that somebody that has never seen your poster or talked about the issue before can look at your poster and get a basic understanding. All right? I'm going to put the instructions back up. And I just want to know, before we get started, what questions do you have about what you're being asked to do? You're going to have about 20 minutes. We'll see where we are in 20 minutes. So you do need to work sort of quick. I'm going to assign you an issue, so you don't get to choose. Yeah, you can see the issues again. Any other questions before we get started? So here are your 10 issues. You'll be working on one of these 10. All right, so what's going to happen right now is I am going to give you about 5 minutes to find a group of 6 people and for you to gather at one of the chart papers. All right, I tell you what would be great is if somebody could do markers and somebody could hand these out. Okay, one stack to each group. There should be about 10 groups. You might want to hold one in reserve just in case there's like an extra group. Yep, that entire stack. So one to one group. Yep. All right. Okay, I should see about 10 groups of 6 people. I see 5 up here, so if you have more than 6, send one of your people right here. I think I see 7-ish or 4 and 3, so one of you, if you'll come right here. Can I get one of this group to come over here with these guys? Oh, thank you. If you guys could be together. All right. Your markers are coming and your issue information is coming. I see 5 right here, so if we have somebody that needs, and 5 right here. Can I steal one of you? Because there are 7 of you, and put one of you over here. I know it works better with the good number of people. All right, so by now you should have your issue information. You might also have a marker or two. You're going to have 20 minutes to graphically represent your issue. Give people as much information as you possibly can. I'm going to be circulating. If you have questions, feel free to flag me. Okay, in 1 minute, I'm going to call us back together, so make sure the last information is on your paper. As you finish, please put your markers down at the base of your poster, and then turn around so you can see me for the next instructions. And when all the groups are turned around, I'll know that you're ready to proceed with the next piece of the activity. All right, I see armed conflict is ready to go. I see gender equality is ready to go. Remember to put your markers down at the base of your poster so my lovely assistants can pick them up. I see that my extreme poverty folks are ready to go. I see child mortality is ready. Maternal health is ready. All right, if you have not finished writing, now is the time to stop, finished or not. Ready or not, here we come. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give instructions for the next piece of the activity, all right? This is an activity that you could do in your classroom, and as you might have noticed, there are several applications. We're going to debrief on that in just a moment. The next piece is what we call a global gallery walk. So when I say go, you're going to walk around the room to view the other posters. You can mingle, you can walk across, you don't have to go in a circle. Just walk around and view the other posters, okay? When I say stop, you're going to find a partner nearest the closest issue and have a standing discussion with them about one thing that stands out to you about that poster. So I'm going to say that one more time. When I say go, you're going to mingle, walk around, look at the posters. When I say stop, you're going to stop and have a standing discussion with a person closest to you, anybody, about the poster you're closest to. Okay? All right, we're going to do this 2 times. First time, go, start walking. If you wanted to in your classroom, you could do this with music. I usually prefer to do it with music, but it's a little tougher this time. There are no prizes involved in this particular activity. I hope that does not change your motivation. All right, and stop at the nearest poster. Stop at the nearest poster and find someone next to you to have a conversation with. Talk about what stands out to you about that issue. You might have a connection to make between the issue you worked on. All right, go. Keep walking. Circulate. Go a different direction than the people who were just next to you. Find some new people to talk to. This is all about diverse perspectives and different ideas, so don't stick with your same friends. And stop wherever you're closest. Have a conversation about that closest poster. Draw some connections, make some observations. All right, so we're going to go ahead and head back to our seats. I will leave these up so that you can see them later on if you'd like to look at other people's posters. It's always interesting to see what they've come up with. But for now, head back to your seat, and we're going to do a quick debrief on this activity and how it can be helpful in the classroom. All right, and I will leave these up, so go ahead and have a seat. They'll be up for you to view. You don't have to get pictures of them all right this second, because I will leave them for you. You can read them all later. This is the truncated version of this activity. If I were doing this in a classroom, I would let students have a chance to look at least half of the issues to really get an idea, and then I would, again, leave them up so that students could view them later on. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how you would use this activity and why it might have been helpful. In order to get us started, is there anybody who has an observation about how they think this activity could be helpful in their class? You'd have to be brave.
I think it's a great way of introducing
So for exhibition, you could introduce students to different global issues. And I want to point out, I really appreciate how you brought in the IB structure there so that you could talk about where you would specifically use this in an IB classroom. Any other observations? Okay, so pulling out main ideas and then being able to introduce that in this manner and talk about it with their peers. That's a great example. I've seen teachers use this as both an introductory activity and also as a summary. So you could use it as a summary of what you've learned. Think about what you learned about maternal health and represent that graphically. You can also use it as an ongoing look at how you are learning. So you could start out, for example, let's go with maternal health. You could start out with that graphic, but no words. And as you learn things in the class, students can add what they've learned. Okay, so it's also a way to sort of chart your learning. This is a very introductory activity, and it's a way to get students moving and talking and thinking about diverse perspectives. It's also a really good way to start a unit and set the expectation that the student has to be the expert. Okay, so they actually have to be responsible for what they've learned and be the expert for the rest of their class. This is important because most of what we do is project-based learning, and so students have to really take responsibility for their learning, and that's true of the IB model as well. In addition, I hope that you learned something new. Okay, when I did this the first time, there were all kinds of pieces of information that I had no idea about. In fact, my favorite one still is that it would cost $6 billion to send every child in the world to school. Consequently, the U.S. spends $6 billion every year on ice cream. It's one of my favorites. So I hope it got your ideas flowing as well. All right, so that is how you might have students investigate the world, but this is not the taking action piece, and I want to talk to you before we leave about how you get students taking action. The way we do that at NGC is by a partnership with 45 global projects. They are vetted organizations that you may work with that we have chosen because they are sustainable models, because they use their money in a trustworthy manner, and because they are grassroots models. We do not believe in large organizations that come into a country and fix that country's problems. And that's because it creates a lot of hierarchies. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. A good example is Apopo. Apopo is an organization in Tanzania, and yes, that is a rat. They train rats to sniff out landmines. So instead of having an incredibly costly and very dangerous process of landmine removal, instead of having soccer fields where kids go out and play and a landmine is detonated, you can send this little rat back and forth across the field. It will smell TNT, it will scratch at the ground, and you know that's where you extract a landmine. It costs $15 to train that guy. So it's an incredibly simple and beautiful solution to a serious real-world problem. And the great thing about connecting students to this kind of an organization is that they can see how real-world problem solvers solved this issue and also lend their voice to that organization. Another example is the Afghan Institute of Learning. It's an organization in Afghanistan that provides women with educational materials. And as you're well aware, Afghanistan is not a place where women get a lot of educational materials. I'm going to come back to AIL later. So this fosters collaboration and global partnership. It's a mindset. It's a global IQ mindset. It is respectable and responsible, and it makes a difference in students' attitude. And this is a really important piece to our organization, but also to me personally, having lived in South Africa and seen so many non-governmental organizations come in and work with that population that I care a lot about. It makes students recognize the power in their own skills, that they don't have to go out and learn how to build a school. They can use their learning that they gained in your classroom. They can use their existing social media skills to advocate. They can use the existing skills that they've developed at home and additionally in the classroom in order to help an organization now. But additionally, they don't have to be Bono or Bill Gates in order to make a difference in the world. And students really think that. I can't make a difference. I'm just a kid in a desk in a classroom. And we want to show them that, yes, they can make a difference and that they can do that now with the skills they have. That they're not doing it alone, that they're in a partnership of people across the world. And finally, that they're in an equal partnership. Helping doesn't really help anybody. It causes a power struggle. We have those who are helping and those who are being helped. What we want is a partnership. We want kids to say, these are the skills I have and these are the skills that these people have, and we can use them together to solve these problems now. And that's a lot of what you want to focus on when you're building global IQ. It's really easy to come in and sort of be the people who save somebody, and that's not what you want to teach students to do. You want to teach students to collaborate. All right, so to get started in developing global IQ, we have to bring our global context to the classroom. We have to have students recognizing perspectives in the classroom. We have to have them taking action in the classroom. Most importantly, to take action, we want students to educate others. That is the most important thing. If we do nothing else with students, we want them to go out and educate other people, even if it's just their mom, right? Because mom might not know these things. Second, students can always raise small amounts of resources for any organization because that can make a difference. I talked about the rats in a popo only costing $15 to train. $15 is a kid's allowance for a few weeks. That's a really manageable amount of money. And finally, involving local leaders and asking for their support. And when you're talking about leaders, that's anybody who has influence. So that might be teachers, that might be your principal, might be your state senator, it might be the president, it could be the Secretary General of the United Nations. It can be anybody that students see having influence. And I just want to make a plug for social media because I am a huge proponent of social media here for students. That's how you get local leaders involved. And that's how you get world leaders involved. Students have the skills to change the world right now, okay? They don't need any skills other than what they're developing in your classroom and what they already have to go out and change the world now. So I want to give you a couple of examples of real-life schools that have used this model and how it's been effective for them. This is a picture of the Renaissance, and that's probably leading you to think, how the heck could you use this in a conversation about the Renaissance? I have a teacher who's named Joanna. She works in Phoenix, and Joanna teaches British Lit, not the most natural transition to global issues conversations. She noticed in her classroom, because she teaches in Phoenix, she has a population that is very into machismo. Her students are super, super excited about the boys, about being very macho and having to show the girls that they're very macho by putting them down. She had a big problem with this in her classroom. In fact, while I was there observing, she had a student who looked at a girl and said, ha, 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 why don't you go make me a sandwich? And she wanted to deal with that head on, but she teaches Brit Lit, right? She's still got to get to all that British literature information. So she actually used the Renaissance to say, why don't we see women in the Renaissance? Why don't we talk about women in the Renaissance? Well, we do. We talked about queen. No. We only talk about them if they were a queen, a princess, or the object of some man's desire, right? So why is that? And where has it put us today? Where have we gotten to with that? So she was able to really effectively use the gender equality resources, even though she wasn't in a very traditional global issues setting. Next is Bobby. Bobby teaches middle school, and she used our resources in order to have her students create brochures about organizations that work with children. Then they had to create a Prezi presentation. Has anybody worked with Prezi? Yeah, it's really a cool new way of doing presentations. In fact, it's on my to-do list as an adult because it's a lot more user-friendly than PowerPoint. It's a lot better for presentations. So they had to create a Prezi on their final knowledge. Also, I had Christy, who's an economics teacher. Christy used our economic sustainability materials in order to talk about the banking crisis in Greece and how, economic sustainability and instability issues can lead to armed conflict. So what do we see happening in Greece that could be leading to armed conflict? How does that compare to historical economic instability and historical armed conflict? And then finally, I always like to tell a really great student story because that's why we do what we do. So this is Stephanie. Stephanie was a member of the Tolleson and GC team. She grew up in Chicago. She moved to Arizona. She had never been that interested in global issues. Just wasn't her thing. She happened to get involved because the Tolleson team is very big. It's very active at their school. And she thought, well, okay, my friends are doing it. I'll do it too. And she started to get very interesting in issues of gender equality. Her team was supporting the Afghan Institute of Learning, which I talked to you about earlier. They are an organization that provides educational materials to women in Afghanistan. So Stephanie started saying, how can we support this organization on a large scale? And the Tolleson team decided to have an event where they could raise awareness and raise some funds for the Afghan Institute of Learning. They studied Afghani culture, and they found that poetry is a really big factor in Afghanistan historically. It's something that Afghans are very, very excited about and into. So they decided to have a poetry night. They wrote to the Afghan Institute of Learning and said, we're having a poetry night, we're raising some money, we're educating people about what's going on in your country. And the Afghan Institute of Learning said, that's so cool, we're going to have one too. Let's have a poetry night too. And so they would have poetry nights that sort of celebrated each other. And that's actually going on now for 4 years running, that each organization has had poetry nights sort of in celebration of each other. So Stephanie got very interested. She now, fast forward several years later, is at Georgetown University for Foreign Service. Okay? She's very invested in global issues, and she has been interning for the last summer in DC. And forgive me, I don't remember what organization she's interning with. She was working one day, and she heard that Sakina Yakubi, who is the leader of the Afghan Institute of Learning, was going to be in her office building. Okay, she's so excited. She's so thrilled. She, of course, weasels her way into that office. It's not actually where she worked. It was like just in one of the offices on a floor below her. So she had to really go out of her way to get to see this woman. And she's planning over a lunch break, what am I going to tell Sakina? I'm so excited to see her. What am I going to tell her? I'm going to tell her she changed my life. She changed my life. I wanted to be a fashion designer, and now I'm going to be in the Foreign Service. I mean, that's a huge change. So I'm going to tell her all these things that we did changed my life and thank her for her influence. She goes into the office. She sees Sakina across the room. Sakina turns around and says, you're the American girl. You changed my life. I'm not making this up. You changed my life, and you changed the lives of the women in our community. Because your organization, you raised so much money that we were able to take on so many more women, and it's made a huge difference in our community. And I mean, when I've worked a 14-hour day, that's why, right? And that's why you work 14-hour days, or 15, or 20 in your first year teaching, because we want to create global citizens like that. We want to create students who go from not really caring and not really being that interested to kids who are so involved in global issues that it becomes the fabric of who they are. All right? Thank you very much for being here today. I hope that I gave you some ideas. I think we have a few minutes for questions if anybody would like to ask questions. And then I'll let you out because I know you want to go have a last fun night in New Orleans. Yes, ma'am. So we're based in Phoenix. But our resources are digital, so anyone in the entire United States can use them. We have schools all across the U.S. We have a variety of schools. We have IB schools, we have independent schools, we have public schools, you name it. Our curriculum resources are for 6th through 12th grade right now. We are working on developing elementary school curriculum. And I will tell you if that's something you're interested in, please come see me because nonprofits decide where we put our time and our money based on what people are asking for. So if you would be willing to work on that with me, I would be happy to work on that with you. We also offer professional development resources as well. Yes, ma'am. Yes, it's on our website. Let me put up that information. Our website has a list of all of the global organizations you can get information about each global partner and what they do and what the issue is that they support. And hopefully soon you're going to be seeing a new version of our website that will even break it down by issue, by region, etc. Other questions? All right, I'll remain up here. We do have some resources before you run away from me. We have folders if you really would like to take home some information and didn't grab them in the exhibit hall. We also, if you're one of those people like me who never unpacks your conference bag, have postcards that you can fill out to yourself, and we will mail it to you as a reminder. And my card is up here as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you for sticking around on the last session. Thanks for a great week in New Orleans. Bye, guys.